In this video essay, I will focus on The Shining and Hereditary, two post-horror films that contain a wide range of themes, such as race, family, gender, and so on. They don't have a lot of jump scare and terrifying creatures, but I think both films do a great job of shaping psychological horror through their ever-increasing creeping atmosphere. Therefore, I will analyze mise and sound to explore how this post-horror film uses a kind of horror and trauma to affect the strong emotion of the audience, which then shows the deep themes of the film. David Church argues that in Hereditary, Ari Aster used very little jump scare. He uses mainly slow camera movements, as well as long take and wide angle to reveal many scary details. So this clip is from Annie's seance. A long take shows that the setting and the characters. First, we see Annie's close-up,
Louis,
and a pan movement.
If you are here with
we see
us,
John, and the camera slowly dolly out.
And slide the glass.
This is because the cup is about to start moving.
Louis,
And then the camera dolly in,
if you're here,
and we see John's close-up. Both Hereditary and The Shining have a lot of these slow-moving long takes, which work well to show the unease and fear of the unknown. We don't know where the shot moves to next, and we are in an anxious mood until we see a landing spot. So, in a different style, I've
Louis,
added the different version. You might have seen a clip like this.
Please just try and slide the glass. If you're here. Hi, Louis.
The camera pans from the attic to Peter's room, accompanied by the sound of flies, which also appears several times in the later scenes as well. The door is closed. The camera moves slowly to Peter's face as Peter is woken by Tom flicking. Then a subjective camera where the director cleverly used a Dutch angle shot to show a sense of loss of balance and an unsettling moment.
Charlie?
Charlie's head suddenly turns into a ball, and the sound becomes suddenly eerie and urgent. And the door is opened. This camera language tells the audience that what was in the attic has now entered Peter's room. You feel constant sense of anxiety during this camera movement and tense up for the terrifying creature hiding in the darkness. But unexpectedly, the director breaks the mold, and the hand reaches out from the brightest part of the entire frame. This design also comes later, when Peter finds his dad's body, and Annie hides in a corner. All we can see is a blurred figure. And then transfer into a point of view looking at the body. The camera finally focuses on Annie. Each point of shock in this scene is eased into the audience field of vision, and there are no close-ups. According to film terminology, our projection of self on screen, our willingness to assimilate ourselves to given characters and viewpoints, we have better immersive experience because of the subjective camera. We stand in the perspective of the characters to feel their changing moods, and we can see things the protagonist can see. Peter spots a strange creature behind him, but we know the creepy Annie hasn't appeared yet, so it is better for us to worry about the protagonist and feel a constant tension and sympathy for the character. As Taja Lam says, The mise of off-screen space enhances the audience's sense of unease and brings up the emotion of trauma, as the fear is consistent with trauma theory, lingering and perceived as an impending disaster. Taja comments that in it follows, we can feel the persistence of this trauma through camera movement, composition, and sound. For example, in Hereditary, after the car accident, 4 long takes are used to show Peter's overwhelm, citing Taja's point that the distant shots in this vast environment and the suffocating darkness of the interior isolates the protagonist. A lens dissolve, an effect that subtly conveys the passage of time. Peter has not slept all night. This long take conveys his deep inner despair. His mother is crying, and his body shakes slightly, but his face remains expressionless. As Taja concludes, we can assume that the mother's cries off-screen allows us to enter Peter's inner world, expressing the depth of his trauma. The director also does not give close-ups of the mother to show her grief, but rather contrasts the different reaction to show a sense of despair and even a sense of eeriness. We also see this use of mise in one of the most disturbing scenes in The Shining, where Danny plays with a ball. As the camera zooms out, we see a carpet with one Indian element and Danny sitting in the middle of it, as if trapped. At this point, a small ball suddenly rolls in, and we can imagine that off-screen, someone has thrown the ball. But the camera cuts to a wide view, and there is no one in front of it. Danny gets up and walks forward, this time with a point of view, a subjective camera. The camera shakes slightly, as if handheld to simulate a realistic walking perspective. A long take, again building up the unease. An eerie atmosphere that heightens the tension of the viewing experience.
Mom, are you in there?
Vincent Jonas mentions that when Jack looks down on the maze, Jack has a dominant perspective, and I couldn't agree more with this. Here's a zoom in, and then the camera cuts to Wendy and Danny. I think it is a close-up effect, and through this editing technique, we can understand the madness of Jack. He gradually losing himself and trying to control Danny and Wendy. And the same technique is used in Hereditary. For example, in the opening scene, we could see a long take. The camera pan goes from the view of the tree house to the mother's miniature house. And after the dolly-in movement, we see a direct transition to the interior scene, which is very amazing. David Church mentions that in the last scene of the film, the tree house scene is rendered into another miniature scene before suddenly switching to black, which makes me think about the metaphor that the devil is already watching and infiltrating the family from the beginning, and that everyone in the family is actually a doll to be manipulated. In Hereditary, there is a wonderful suspense-making sound, which is ambient sound. Before we watch this scene, the series of eerie events that precede it makes us feel tense and oppressed, and we can clearly sense that something is wrong. So when we are in this silent space, we are more likely to feel uneasy about the danger that lurks in the wide shot. The sound of the flies, I think, is meant to suggest that the danger of the protagonist entering the attic. Interestingly, the director is trying to convey more than what we see in this scene. As we can see,
Dad?
his mother is hiding in the corner when the overall brightness of the frame is raised. But due to the key light in this scene, our attention is focused on Peter. If a sting sound effect were added here, it will obviously scare the audience along with this horror. But Ari Aster doesn't want to do that. He wants to build up the final climax through a kind of consistent suspense created by the quiet and scary moments. There is also this clever sound design when Peter hides in the attic. We notice the constant high notes and strings being used to build anxiety and tension. The sound suddenly stops and the protagonist jumps out the window to escape. This scene does not use the sudden sound effects to scare the audience. Instead, we can hear a very everyday sound like an alarm clock ringing when the background sound almost stops. And then the camera suddenly cuts to three scary creatures in a pure visual horror. Suspenseful sounds like this are also used in this clip from The Shining. For example, when the cameraman operates the Steadicam following the shots from behind, and we hear the disturbance due to the loud sound, and here there is no background music. In the second clip, the director weakens the ambient sound and adds a piece of music in order to emphasize the tension, but the soundtrack is slow and low. In the third clip, we can clearly feel the music become harsh and urgent, and the sound effect is added, with a drum sound coming from Danny as he turns a corner, suggesting to the audience that there is something scary around the corner, and then we see the twins. Interestingly, the director's attention to detail is also evident in these three turns, as the number of turns decrease and the pitch of the music increase, despite the overall warm color palettes of all three sections, all reflecting the director's desire to build suspense and force the audience to feel increasingly uncomfortable, creating a sense of psychological terror. As Smith-Gregg says, Kubrick's Shining has not spoke his story, but rather psychological suggestion through subtlety. Smith-Gregg mentions that The Shining is concerned for family, Jack's alcoholism and domestic violence towards Danny, which is why Wendy rages against Jack when Danny is injured. Jack also shifts his conflicts over his inability to write and reveals his disgust with Wendy. And then Jack talks about killing his wife and daughter. We could see the conflict between the families is affected by multiple factors, such as the career, family, and hotel. Ari Aster revealed that Annie's model has in fact implied to himself as the creator of the family tragedy, which I think was caused by Annie's neglect of communication with her family members and the effects on Peter's mental state, which led to the family tragedy. Despite Ellen's death at the beginning, through Annie's description of her mother at the funeral, we could see the director using the influence of this cult to show the destructive and emotional trauma within the family, in line with David Church's reference to The Shining as a mystical force that invades from the outside to show the family tragedy. It is when the people closest to us in a family appear to us in a strange way that is most chilling. As the famous director Hitchcock said, there is no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it. These two films combine cinematography, subtext, and sound with a series of design that use suspense to progressively drive the narrative and finally creates a horrific, twisted family and social relationship that hides beneath the quiet life.